CNN anchor Audie Cornish and former Deputy Chief of Staff to Adam Kinzinger also worked with John Boehner. Maura Gillespie back with us. Good to have you all. Audie, taking a step back here, I was talking with our team last night, saying the politics matter, the process matters. The American people matter the most. And this is the first time in history where we have ever seen no Speaker of the House. They're going to be gone. It's going to be at least a week until we see one. And should there be a disaster, should there be an emergency, they're really handicapped. How should people think about this waking up this morning for them?
Well, first, I don't want to alarm people in thinking that somehow no one's running the country right now. Like, White House, fine, Senate, fine. This is a very particular problem on one side of this building. But it is not only Kevin McCarthy's problem, because in 40-something days, we're all going to be talking again about the continuing resolution and this idea of potentially shutting down the government, et cetera. And the same fissures and same battles that kicked this off in the first place, maybe you could say earlier this year, but I'd argue probably a decade ago, are going to come back, only with a new leader. So the question is, who is that, and what will they have to give away to make that happen?
What's the answer to that? Because the reason I ask is because I think Audie makes an excellent point in the sense of this has been building for 3 decades, right? This is from the Newt Gingrich era, and to his credit, won the majority. First time in decades. However, this has just continued to evolve inside the party. What are the answers to those questions?
Well, it's interesting because last night at Kevin McCarthy's sidewinding press conference that lasted nearly an hour after he was ousted,
still in it psychologically.
Yeah,
I'm still there.
After he was ousted. So he was asked multiple times in multiple different ways, how does the Republican Party move forward? And he would not talk about it as being a problem within the Republican Party. He would say it is a problem within just a small faction of people who call themselves conservatives who aren't really conservatives. But the reality is as you mentioned, Phil, and as you alluded to, Audie, is that this is not the first time this has happened to a Republican speaker. It's happened a few times to a Republican speaker who's unable to keep their job because of the divisiveness and the factions within the Republican Party and a faction of the party that doesn't want to govern. So maybe the next speaker knows how to do it, but it's a big, big job and
what
a big
lesson
ask.
would you have taken away, right? Like, you worked for Boehner. So Boehner, Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, maybe they didn't get voted out the same way, but make no mistake, they were essentially kicked out, right, or ousted, and pushed out of the party in a way. And so what lesson could you possibly have taken from the last decade that Kevin McCarthy himself wouldn't have learned?
John Boehner had plans to retire, and I know everyone likes to say that he was kicked out, but he had plans to retire. This just made it that much easier for him. He is a conservative, and he stands by his own principles and the conservative values. The party has shifted from him. He is not, his principles haven't shifted, but the party's principles have.
But you hear this over and over again, right?
Yes.
I mean, fundamentally, he did not have control of that caucus. He may have wanted to retire, and I don't want to relitigate that period.
But the fact is,
his legacy is not like, wow, he really, locked that in.
What's interesting is that how the speakerships, they're all run differently, right? Pelosi runs it differently, Boehner ran it differently, and he wanted to give power back to the members. Now, some will say,
How's that going?
Some will say exactly that. His idea of wanting to give the power back to the members empowered them to not be happy if they didn't get 100% of the things they wanted. And we're hearing that from members, the 8 that voted to oust Speaker McCarthy, that if they didn't get everything they wanted, they're going to take him out. And is that how our politics is going to go from here on out? In the Republican Party, it may.
Because there was widespread criticism by the Republican Party of Pelosi about how she ran the House.
She ran it too strict.
Also, and she had 2 very slim majorities, right? 4 and 5 people, same thing. Still passed enough legislation to make her the boogeyman for another decade to the Republicans. So why is the takeaway that this form of speakership, appeasing this person, that person, that person, is going to somehow get you to governance?
I think it was more about, let's give power back to the conference and put it to the committees to put the bills together, as opposed to what Pelosi did was have a core group of people who wrote the bills. And again, you can argue the merits of which style is better. It was how we envisioned it.
Well, one chair is empty.
Correct. So I'm just saying, but Boehner,
I don't disagree,
but I don't disagree, and I think that Boehner had it going in with this with a positive. Let's be positive thinking. Let's be a unified party. And you had those on the far right who were like, yeah, actually, I don't like this because I'm not getting everything I wanted. So they moved the goalpost. And we saw that time and time again. It was super frustrating. But John Boehner had relationships across the chamber, but also across the aisle.
Are you saying that's different from McCarthy?
Absolutely. I'm saying that's different. And all this comes down to is relationships. And there is a real problem in the Republican caucus and the Republican conference and their ability to have relationships with Democrats. For some reason in this country, we've decided to view each other as enemies as opposed to political opponents. And we're hurting ourselves with doing that.
Let's talk about moving forward, Leanne.
Yeah.
The big names being floated